Do you have a second? I thought I could talk to you about my favorite candy, Laffy Taffy. Let me tell you why it's my favorite. It's not because of its fruity flavors or its silly jokes, although I do love those things. It's because of the struggle it takes to enjoy it. I know that sounds kind of weird, but think about it for a second. When you have a Laffy Taffy, you have to chew so much that your jaw is sore, and then your tongue is exhausted from plying it off of your gums. You feel like you've truly earned it at that point. In fact, that's why I enjoy Laffy Taffy. I know that I have to struggle, but I also know there's going to be a lovely, fruity sensation at the end to stick through. It makes it all worth it. But not all struggles in this world are the same, though, aren't they? No, some of them are harder than others. In fact, in the middle of this pandemic time we're sitting in right now, there's a lot of really hard struggles. Some families don't have jobs and don't have a steady income. Some family have members of them stuck in hospitals and we don't know how they're going to be, or even if they're going to live through that. And then some families are stuck amongst abusive relationships or neglectful relationships with no way to get out right now. These are all really hard things. And it kind of makes us not help but wonder, has God turned his back on us? In fact, it makes it so that we can't help but ask the question, how? Not how did God turn his back, but how can we survive all of this struggle and adversity right now? I've been thinking about that question for a little while now, and I can't help but feel drawn to a certain little passage of scripture in the book of Psalm. It's Psalm 13, and it's about a guy who is abandoned by God. At least he feels that way. And yet, it ends with him saying he trusts in God. No matter if you're desperate, hopeless, or just plain stuck in your situation right now, I think we all could pull something out of Psalm 13. I feel like it's telling us something we need to hear. So with your permission, I'd like to go through it. Starting with verse 1 and 2, we hear this. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Where we're at right now, the psalmist is in a very depressing state. He's tired. He feels abandoned and forgotten. He feels like he can't even see or hear God anywhere around him. That's a horrible place to be. On top of that, he's wrestling with his own horrible thoughts and the sorrow in his heart. And even on top of that, he feels like his enemies, whoever or whatever they are beating him. They're controlling him. And he's just in a hopeless place. I feel like we can relate to that a little bit. Perhaps the psalmist has just experienced death in the family. And though days have passed, that sorrow and grief still suffocates them, hanging over them. Perhaps the psalmist has a physical or mental disability, and though no matter how hard he tries to look normal like everyone else, in the end he feels isolated, exposed, or alone. Perhaps the psalmist just feels stuck where he's at, and no matter how hard he tries, he cannot find the motivation to do anything. He knows it should be easy, but he just can't seem to care. These are all grounds for us to understand why this psalmist might give up where he's at. He might just give in to the things trying to control him and get through it at another time. But that's not what the psalmist does. No, instead, he writes this psalm beginning with just telling us and God, I'm not okay. I'm being controlled. I am not myself. And that's just where he's at. He shows us the first choice we get to make while in the midst of suffering, and that is the choice to expose ourselves to God. It sounds kind of weird to tell God these things, but it makes sense. I mean, think about it. If I was to fall on my face or stub my toe, my very first thing I would say is, ow! I would audibly tell others that I'm in pain. I would want you to know that. And it's the same with God. It all begins with being vulnerable with him. and kind of admitting to ourselves that we're not okay, because we're not. The psalmist doesn't stop there, though. He transitions over to verse 3 and 4, where he then says, "Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." We see a little transition here. A bold one, really. The psalmist takes his vulnerabilities that he mentioned before and uses them to ask God for help. He's basically saying, God, I cannot do this myself. I am struggling. I can't see you. I need you to reveal yourself to me. I feel beaten by my enemies. I need you to give at least a little bit of hope to me. This is where he shows us the second choice we get to make while struggling. And that is the choice to reconnect ourselves to God through prayer. I mean, God is eagerly waiting to hear from us. And he wants to connect with us. I mean, isn't that what prayer is about? Having a connection with God. In Matthew 7, on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus had said, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be open. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him?" Oh, I'm getting blurry here. Hello. There we go. This brings in a good point that God can't help us if we are not asking for it. This is all about the freedom of speech and the ability to do whatever you want in God's plan. He's not going to help you if you can't ask for it. So we need to be vulnerable with him, and we need to reconnect to him by asking. The psalmist then concludes with verses 5 and 6 that have a little bit of an interesting note to them. Let's go ahead and read it. Verse 5 says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." We see here the key and the reason that the psalmist is writing. It's trust. Trust in God. See, among all of these bad things that are happening to the psalmist, he says that I am trusting in your unfailing love. He's basically saying, God, I am trusting you. I know that you have heard me, and I believe that you won't fail. This is a bold move the psalmist is making. He's choosing to give up what little control he has left in this situation. Though he's being beaten by his enemies, he's surrendering. This is the choice he gives us. The last choice we have while we are struggling is to surrender ourselves to God. In the Last Supper, in John chapter 15, Jesus says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Jesus is inside us whether we can feel him or not. And when it really comes down to it, we must choose to surrender our control so Jesus can have the reins to change us from the inside out. So what is Psalm 13 trying to say to us? Well, in the midst of this pandemic, you might feel threatened. Our way of life is threatened, really. And as you worry about yourself and the lives of your family and the safety, it's okay to admit that you're not okay. It's okay to admit that you need help. It's okay to need that. And it's also okay to not be able to stand on your own 2 feet. It's okay to rely on God for that, or on someone else. How can we survive all this struggle and adversity? We can rely on God. That is the goodness that makes the stubborn taffy worth chewing. So I guess the last question I have for you is this. What do you call a lazy bull?